Hello and welcome to the Pitt Mailbag Show here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter here with Stephen Thompson, your Pitt beat writers. Here as always on every Tuesday, answering the questions that you submitted on Pitt football, basketball, and all things Pitt athletics here on this show. Thanks again for tuning in. Remember, you can always get this show and all of our content from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of the daily content that we got here. But Stephen, we got a lot to talk about. And it's coming off of a really big week for Pitt athletics. Their big win over in the Backyard Brawl was very impressive. We covered that live. We had our post-game reaction video, which you can go back and check out on this same channel, giving all your thoughts there. But also it was a big week with volleyball being named #1 in the country. Of course, Heather Lyke being let go by the university. And then all of that capped off with a 10-point late comeback against their bitter rivals, the West Virginia Mountaineers. A pretty crazy week in the world of covering Pitt athletics.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but it's kind of exhausting. I mean, going way back to Cincinnati and the 21-point comeback there.
Yeah,
you lead right into an AD search now, and then you get volleyball, you get the Backyard Brawl. It's we're hoping that Youngstown State week and then the bye week after that gives us a little bit of a rest. But, man, these games have been really exciting. You know, if you're going to get worn out doing your job, there are worse ways to do it than watching games like that.
absolutely. And let's get into some of the talk about the games because we got a lot of questions about this game in particular and how the Panthers will move forward after this game. Let's start off with a question we got from Doug, and there's also another question that will build off of this. Doug says, it was a great win, but how worried should I be about the offensive line play? And Stephen, the offensive line did not look good in this game. This is the first game where Desmond Reid really didn't get to do much on the ground. They did punch it in on the last drive with Derek Davis, and they were able to get it done in short distances. But in this game, there were 23 pressures allowed on Eli Holstein. He got sacked 5 times in this game. 8 of those pressures came from Ryan Baer, the starting right tackle, who's been on the team for a few years now. 5 of those pressures came from Lyndon Cooper, the center. Ryan Jacoby allowed 3. Branson Taylor, another 3. Jason Collier, 2. And B.J. Williams, 1, having the best day of the lineman who saw a decent amount of snaps in this game. But all that to say, Stephen, it's pretty clear the offensive line struggled in this game. And I think the big question here, like Doug said, is this something that's going to carry over all season long, or do you think this is something that can get shored up as the year continues?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm pretty concerned, mostly because, I asked Pat Narduzzi today, like, are these problems, are they mental, are they physical, like, what is kind of the nature of these issues? Are they, what I really wanted to ask is, are they fixable?
Yeah.
And, he said that they are more physical than mental. That means either bad technique or, you're slow to get into you're slow to slide back and get into protection or things of that nature. So, I think the technique being worse than the mental aspect and the running of the scheme is a little bit more concerning for me. I think also the depth is an issue as well. I mean, Ryan Jacoby was supposed to be, an immediate upgrade at left guard, and he hasn't been that so far. Ryan Baer in his second year as a starting right tackle, he's supposed to be a big part of this offense as well after, getting all that experience last year. And both of those guys have been, dare I say, really unimpressive. I think especially that West Virginia tape is not going to be kind to either Jacoby or Baer. Jacoby especially, who was subbed out midway through the second half in place of Jason Collier. And then on top of that, Jason Collier is really the only backup that I think I have a ton of confidence in. So it's not like if Baer doesn't get much better, if Jacoby doesn't get much better, those guys are still listed as starters right now. If they don't get much better, I don't think there are easy plug-and-play options behind them. So I think that's part of why I am concerned and pretty concerned about this. I will say, what gives me some confidence is that I think Cade Bell is smart enough of an offensive coordinator to make things a little bit easier on the offensive line and conversely, Eli Holstein, who'll, maybe play with more tight end sets close to the line so that they can chip some edge rushers. We know that a big part of this offense is getting the ball out quick and when playmakers make moves in space. I think he's shown, late in the second half against Cincinnati and then, throughout this entire game against West Virginia, that he can move the pocket. He can put Eli Holstein on the run a little bit and let him use his legs and athleticism to make things a little bit easier, give him some more time. So it's not looking good for the offensive line. I think there are ways to make this more palatable. But yeah, this offensive line has not been good so far. I think it's probably the biggest hurdle to Pitt maybe maximizing their potential. I think they're off to a great start, but the biggest impediment to being what this team could be and maybe making a run at the ACC championship game is this offensive line.
Agree. The offensive line has to find a way to get better. Now, I do think there's some things about it that can get better. Like guys like BJ Williams, there are guys that are very young who are figuring it out, who are getting better. A guy like Ryan Jacoby, he's been around. Granted, he also is coming back from injury. There's a lot to account for there. But guys like Branson Taylor, guys like Ryan Baer, they're guys that you'd hope would be in a better situation right now than they currently are. And I think one thing you brought up is the depth question there. In years past, we've seen guys like Matt Gonsalves, even Carter Warren at times, guys who were young and promising in the depth chart come up when either guys got hurt or just guys weren't playing well, and then they became the starters that were really good offensive linemen for the Pitt Panthers in recent years. And like you said, I don't know if there's a whole bunch of guys like that or any guys like that right now on this roster that are like young and ready to go and take over and make a difference on the O-line. I think that's got to be a priority for Pitt in this upcoming recruiting class, is to get some big dogs up front who can play, who can manage situations in the trenches. That's going to be very important. And, I think that's certainly where Pitt is lacking right now. And we talked about it leading into this game about how West Virginia was going to try to control the trenches and control the clock. And Pitt was going to have to try to win outside of those areas. Well, West Virginia, for all but about 2 drives at the end of the game, all about 5 minutes in the second half, did just that. And that put them in position to win. And then you saw how quickly Cade Bell's offense was able to strike and neutralize that advantage. And that leads to this next question here. It's kind of building off of it. KGS, can the offensive defensive lines improve to a significant degree, or is this just what we can expect all season? Stephen, I think we kind of talked about the offensive line and whether they can improve. I think they can. Certain guys can. There's certain guys that are young, but I want to talk about this defensive line for a sec, because you were there. I asked. There was a reason I asked Pat Narduzzi about his defensive front stuffing the run, because now they've given up over 100 yards rushing to back-to-back opponents in Cincinnati and West Virginia. And I asked because you and I were sitting in the press box saying, like, I don't think the defensive tackles are the problem right now against the run. They're getting pushed. They're getting in the backfield. It's just that behind them there isn't the proper fills to fill the holes that are still there, and that's leading to problems. And Pat Narduzzi basically confirmed that when I asked him about that on Monday, basically going over and saying, like, yeah, we need our guys to be in spots. We don't teach our defensive tackles to hold up the offensive line. We teach them to penetrate and attack, and trust that our guys behind them are going to make the right plays.
Yeah, no, and I think you were spot on. And I think Pat basically agreed with you and thought you saw the right things. There have been multiple times, I think I noticed it most poignantly against Cincinnati, where there would be rushing lanes and Pitt would have enough guys to cover those rushing lanes, but it's either Kyle Lewis or Rasheem Biles who is taking a step forward into those holes but not attacking them.
Right.
Either they're getting stuck behind one of their defensive linemen, or they are just not making the plays in the hole. And I think that's been the biggest issue here. I mean, Narduzzi indicated that there might be a little bit of hesitation among these younger linebackers. These guys aren't either reading the holes right or fitting correctly against the run. I think the issues that we are seeing, and I think, when people refer to kind of the defensive line struggling a little bit, I think they're referring to the run defense struggling a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. That's had more to do with the linebackers and how they've played within the scheme than anything else. I think you're right that the defensive line is getting penetration, certainly more than they did at the beginning of the year against Kent State. But I think these linebackers have a ways to go. And we can keep in mind that all of these guys are young, except for maybe Key Thompson, who was also out against West Virginia. But Brandon George had never started a game before. Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles, those guys have limited, if any, game action after their freshman seasons. So long way to go for these guys. It's a long season. I think they're all pretty talented, but they certainly have a way to go processing-wise before they can then really maximize their potential.
Agreed. And also, whereas Pitt's offensive line is giving up pressures, Pitt's defensive line is getting pressure. Nate Matlack right now has 14 pressures on the season, according to Pro Football Focus. Jimmy Scott, 6. Sincere Edwards, 5. True freshman right there, by the way. Nakai Johnson, 3. Isaiah Neal, 2. Chief Borders, 2. And you want some more from some of those guys. But, I mean, they're getting in the backfield. I think one thing they have to do is they have to finish plays more often. That's the biggest thing. They're able to get penetration. But these are the types of things that, like, you're seeing, hey, they're doing these things. If they just add on these small things here and there, they can put a complete picture together and be a much better defense. I do think that is the case, especially when you look at that defensive front right now for Pitt.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you didn't even mention Nick James, who I think has been their best defensive tackle through 3 games. He's getting a ton of push and a ton of pressure inside that. He's creating a lot of havoc for opposing offensive lines to deal with. So, I mean, to kind of bring it back to the question, I mean, I think the defensive line can certainly get better. I think they will get better. I think they have been getting better over each of these successive weeks. But the thing about Pat Narduzzi defenses and, really defense in football in general, you need every part of the whole to kind of work simultaneously. They all got to complement each other. And the defensive line and the linebackers, most of all, those guys have to kind of be working in unison and be really in sync if they're going to be the best that they can be as a unit.
Absolutely. Let's keep it moving with questions because we got quite a few this week after the brawl. Roy asked a question about an in-game call. He says, has Narduzzi given any explanation for that atrocious 4th and 1 call on Saturday? Of course, this is referencing the 4th and 1 call towards the end of the first half. Pitt had the ball close to midfield. And the play was a shovel pass from Eli Holstein to Kenny Johnson behind the line of scrimmage. It gets blown up right away, and nothing comes of that play. And it was kind of interesting to see that live. And we were all like, that didn't make any sense. And then Pat Narduzzi did kind of indicate on that play that that wasn't exactly what they were trying to do. Here is the quote he gave when we asked about him after the game. He said, quote, it wasn't a mixed communication. It was a misexecution. He said, it wasn't close to the play that we wanted. It's disappointing. We'll get it cleaned up, but it was not even close to the play that we wanted. I know what play it was. We take a chance to go for it on 4th down. We're taking a gamble there. We expect to get 1 yard. We'll figure that out. Steven, looking back at the play, I really think that the play was it was supposed to be a pitch to Kenny Johnson for sure, but in a different spot that would have allowed him to get behind Desmond Reid, who goes in as a lead blocker, and it would have been a collective push up the middle instead of putting him out in an odd space where West Virginia could swarm him and he had no support.
Yeah, I think it was most evident that Kenny Johnson was not supposed to get the ball there because Eli Holstein, I think, hesitates a little bit before he makes that pass. He held the ball for a beat and then realized, oh, shoot, I just got to get the ball to Kenny and see what he can do. That's the best we can get out of the situation right now. So, yeah, I think that was definitely that was both the wrong play to run and poor execution on that play that was supposed to be run. So, I don't know. I think it looks worse because there were, a handful of other trick plays that Pitt ran that did not go anywhere, and they continued to try to run them when they did not go anywhere. But I don't think it's I think it's something that Pitt is going to be able to collectively kind of move on from. I think those trick plays will be shoved kind of further down the playbook, and Pitt's going to be a little bit more vanilla than they were in this game against the Mountaineers moving forward.
I hear that. Let's move it on here. We got Jim with a question more about the overall approach of the game. Jim says, Narduzzi made huge changes on offense. Would or should he make changes to the approach on defense? If they can't get home with pressure more consistently, makes leaving defensive backs on islands more risky. Now, Steven, I feel like we get this question every year about Pitt's defense when they get torched for some big plays. Why are they still in it? Before we get into the should, I want to get into the wood, and absolutely, Pat Narduzzi will not be changing this defense at any point in time. This is his defense. This is his defense dating back to Michigan State. This is the defense that they pride themselves on. I've seen entire games. You and I were at Western Michigan when they lost that game. And I thought, like, wow, this was a terrible performance. Pat Narduzzi needs to change this defense entirely. And his answer was not, hey, let's switch up some things and how we do them. It wasn't, hey, let's try to incorporate these different things on defense. It's nah, blitz harder, blitz faster, make more plays, be more aggressive, just be more detailed in doing so. And to their credit, that same season, the defense was kicking butt at the end of the season when they won an ACC championship, played pretty well there. And it's also the defense that gets their cornerbacks into the NFL and their defensive backs into the NFL. A lot of people, talk about it. And we've seen, NFL teams start to copy it a little bit more in the NFL. I think that there's certainly some liabilities there, but Steven, the wood we know is not going to happen, but do you think that there should be a shift in how they approach things on defense?
I think there should be small shifts. I mean, we've watched for the past 2 weeks. I mean, mostly against Cincinnati, to a lesser extent against West Virginia, but we've seen teams face, a 3rd and 4, a 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6 against Pitt, and just run quick outs to the sidelines while the corners are playing off coverage, or even the safeties if you've got a receiver coming from the slot, and they just run a simple out route to the sticks, and it's a first down every time. So I think they can make small adjustments there where, your safeties aren't playing so far off when they're covering the slot. Your corners don't play as far off when they're facing a 3rd and medium or a 3rd and short. I think those things can work, and those things can make Pitt's defense a lot better, especially on important downs like that. But I don't know. I think there's enough evidence here that Narduzzi's defense, his scheme at least, works most of the time, and that there is some logic behind it. I think they just have to be better at it, quite frankly. I think you need the personnel to run it, first of all. I don't think they had, quite the personnel to run it last year, but you need this defensive line to be a little bit better against the run. You need the linebackers to support them a little bit more as well. You need your defensive ends to finish off some pass rush plays more, I think. But then you also need your defensive backs to be in better position. You need them to turn their heads when there are deep balls coming their way. I think there are more technique things, and I think there are issues there that can be solved with experience, that aren't necessarily indicative of, a lack of talent or an incorrect scheme. And like you said, when this defense is humming, it really does work. I mean, I think last year, the 2021 season that you referenced, I mean, the best offense they played that year was Wake Forest. And they, one of the ways that they really beat Wake Forest and hammered things home against them, hammered home a win in the ACC championship game, was by putting a ton of pressure on Sam Hartman and forcing him into bad throws. So that's kind of the idea behind this. You're exploiting the youth a little bit of college quarterbacks and college offenses.
Yep.
You're baiting them into mistakes. And I think if you have some more experienced players, the better that scheme works. But right now, Pitt is young, don't have a ton of starts under their belt. I think that's most evident in the defensive secondary, and that's where things need to get cleaned up a little bit. Like we said, the defensive line is going to get better, but once these 3 levels of the Pitt defense are working together and playing at a higher level together, that's when these questions about, does Pat need to reimagine his defense, they become less relevant in my mind.
I agree with the assessment. It's more about the tweaks because, again, we've seen the system work. We know that this is what they want to do, and when they do it well, they are a unique challenge for opponents when they come to play Pitt. And that's, I think, is important when you're a little more specialized into doing things that not everyone else does. But that's the thing. They got to tweak these things. And I covered that 2021 ACC championship run where they gave up a ton of points to Western Michigan. And like the big key that they got from that game was, hey, everyone's trying to do too much. Everyone's trying to step out of their roles and be a hero. We need everyone to stick to their jobs and do their jobs aggressively and be a hero in your role. And it took until about, I'd say, like mid-season before that really settled in. But when it settled in, that Pitt defense was tough. They gave up 21 points in the first quarter to Wake Forest, but then they shut them out for the final 3 quarters. And I'll never forget how badly they broke down that Wake Forest offense in that ACC championship game. I mean, there was no hope for the Demon Deacons to move the ball once the defense was just kept hitting their quarterback over and over and over and over. And I think that's where Pitt likes to be. They want to stuff the run. They want to get after the quarterback, and they want to trust their defensive backs to win in single coverage more often than not. And hey, again, last 2 weeks, you could say they didn't clean up enough early, But when the chips were down, yes, everyone's looking at Eli Holstein and how well he did. But Eli Holstein's drives wouldn't matter that much if Pitt doesn't get some crucial stops late against Cincinnati or crucial stops late against West Virginia this week. I think back to that Rashad Battle breakup on a third down fade pass that held West Virginia to a field goal. And I also think back to just the 3 and out there to force after Eli Holstein's first of the fourth quarter touchdowns. So I look at that and I think, man, there's something to work with there. Like you said, tweak up the things that are fix up the things that need tweaking. Don't leave an open man in the slot with 7 yards cushion on a 4th and 5. Things like that. But like you said, young team, sometimes that just takes some time to settle in and get there.
Absolutely, I 100% agree.
Let's move on to our last question. Stick with the defense. Ian asks, is this linebacker room the best of the Pat Narduzzi era? Now, let me tell you, that's a long era, brother. We're in the 10th year of it. Steven, I'm going to take it first. I think it can be. I think it could be if these guys grow the right way. But I'm sorry, it is not because I covered that 2021 team with Servassier, Dennis. And they had depth for days on that team. You go back and you look at guys like Johnny Patrician and Phil Campbell coming off the bench, and like they were problems for teams. And Servassier, Dennis, he was a dog, he was a leader, he was a heady player. I look at that, and then the guys that they had coming up behind him, the outside linebackers those years, I think that is still the best year of the linebackers. But as far as raw talent that could be molded, I do think there is a potential for this linebacker room to be the best in Narduzzi's tenure. What say you, Steven?
I'm pretty partial to this group. I think their depth is really good as well, but I think the athleticism and the explosive playability is
unique.
Really unlike anything that we've seen since Narduzzi took over. That was certainly a good group of linebackers during that 2021 season, but I also think the defensive line gave them a lot of help. Like that,
Elijah Cansey certainly doesn't hurt anybody.
Right. Elijah Cansey, Habakkuk Baldonado, Deslin Alexander, Keyshawn Camp. Like the names just kept coming. I mean, Dayon Hayes was on that line as well. So I felt like the strength of that team was their defensive line, and they had a couple good cornerbacks as well, or a few good cornerbacks who could make plays for them as well. So I really think this linebacker just separates itself because of that athletic ability. I mean, Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles are human heat-seeking missiles, and I love their depth as well. I feel like they've got young guys who are going to be molded as well. But like you said, I mean, I personally am partial to this group of linebackers this year, but I think this will be a much easier question to answer, in 2025 or maybe even 2026, because you are going to have this really raw young talent that Pitt has loads of right now. It's going to be developed by that point. It's going to be fully grown, and these guys are going to be dudes by then, assuming they stay, of course. But you never know what the transfer portal can hold. But, yeah, for right now, they are at worst number 2 in my mind, and they are going to be number 1. A lot of these same players are going to be part of that number 1 group in the years coming.
Absolutely. He's Stephen Thompson. I'm Chris Carter. We are your Pitt beat writers for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thanks for tuning in for another Pitt mailbag show here for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. A reminder, you can get this show every Tuesday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Tuesday Pitt mailbag shows, our post-game shows, and all of the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. From Chris Carter and Stephen Thompson, have a great Tuesday. We'll see you again later this week as we continue to get ready for Pitt taking on Youngstown State with a chance to have their first ever undefeated regular season non-conference schedule since they joined a conference in 1991. We'll see if they get there later this week. Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.